This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And this is Christine Owen from Guidehouse.
Today, we're going to talk about identity management in the federal government. Hit the music, Claude.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Today, we have in person Christine Owen, director at Guidehouse. Christine, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Well, I used a very scientific approach to invite you today. What I do every time I do these silly interviews, I always sit around, have a cup of coffee and go, well, who should I have on next? And they'll recommend this company or this agency. And then someone said Guidehouse. I said, that sounds like a publishing company or something. And so I contacted, you got anyone smart there? And they said, well, we got Dr. Harry Greenspun. I go, I've had him on too many times. How about Christine? Christine would be fine. So that's how you got the distinguished invitation to be on Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. And so your website, and this is a great part about your website, big phrase that says, outwit complexity. He said, well, we got a lot of complex topics to talk about here. Access management and identity, that's a complex topic. Got about 5 hours of that we can go through. We're just going to do about a half hour here and find out your experience. You've got a great experience inside the government, outside the government. You got a little legal background there. I've listened to several of your interviews. You certainly know the terminology back and forth. Maybe that's your language background, but your terminology is, whew. You got
thank you.
PhD in acronyms or something, so that's real good. So let's set the stage. I think everyone knows COVID hit, and a lot of people start working remotely. All of a sudden, all that kind of hints, intimations about identity management, it's like the frog boiling. It got to the point where it boiled up to the top. And so set the stage for us, and we'll dive into some of the big challenges we have with federal identity management, please.
Sure. So I got to say, I think the best thing that could have happened to cybersecurity and to identity management is absolutely COVID. So one reason for that is because a lot of the vendors who had been working towards doing some really great advancements, they started accelerating those advancements. So before we had okay identity vetting. We now have pretty stellar identity vetting vendors. We have a lot of vendors on the marketplace. We didn't have that before. We now also have what I call a zero trust broker, which allows us to do more granular authentication and access control, which is something that we absolutely need to be able to hit that zero trust architecture that we're all trying to do, especially in the federal government. And then the other thing is that I feel like every organization in the world finally woke up and said, oh my gosh, identity management actually matters. We need to do something about it. So it's been a wild ride, because I started with identity management in the federal government in 2013, where I was supporting an agency that was doing policies on federal ICAM. And at that time, it was really hard to see any sort of adoption within the government. And now here we are with executive level mandates to really drive better adoption for more complex things like ABAC, right? Which is essentially that's contextual authentication to get you to zero trust. So it's really, really exciting to be a part of this particular time period, because we're seeing that people are starting to understand it more. And we're also seeing the change of, I actually want to protect my systems. How do I do this? Okay, now I need funding. How do I get that? So we're working through all of the challenges we have now with legacy systems and all the other things.
You know, some people study foreign languages as an undergraduate. I studied history, so I look at everything from a historical perspective. And I remember years ago studying all those acronyms, RBAC and ABAC and all this and that. And I got my certifications and all that stuff. And back in the day, back where you were in UVA, they really liked ABAC, and then it switched somehow to role-based, and all of a sudden it's like this big momentum. Everything's RBAC, and now we see the momentum stop with COVID, and everyone's going, now this doesn't make much sense. Maybe it should be based on access rather than your role, because your role can be faked because of identity. And so now you just use that term very trippingly in the tongue, ABAC. But that's really seems to be the trend here. If this is from 40,000 feet looking at trends in identity management.
Yeah. So I would say the reason why there was that switch. So let's talk about that. So back in the day when I was at UVA, actually it was a little after that, I swear, but back in the day, NIST did a really good job of creating the rules around ABAC. They have, I can't remember the publication, but they have an ABAC publication that's actually quite good. It's like 116 pages. Maybe you need to drink a lot of coffee while you're reading it, but it really explains what ABAC is, right? So it's the whole idea of attribute-based access control to be able to take all of your available attributes for a user and all the other things surrounding that user and deciding whether or not they should get access to a target application, right? But the problem was when they created this, we didn't have the technology in place, right? So there were a couple things where the technology was there, but it required a lot of integration and it required a lot of coding, which quite frankly, we don't have that workforce availability in the US because we need faster, easier things that are low code, no code to be able to go through and do the integrations quickly and protect quickly, right? So at the time, for a very long time, that wasn't available. I'm now seeing more and more vendors come out with products that are allowing at ABAC, allowing you to be able to put that into the system, but it's also on a low code, no code basis so that we can have people who aren't developers, but who are still very skilled cybersecurity experts go in and do these integrations. And I think that's really important. The fact that the vendors are now giving us less requirements for developers in their products is allowing us to train up quickly more people in the cybersecurity world so that we can have more people go and do the work that needs to get done. I mean, I think you probably know this. We have the count right now is at least 500,000 people we have in dearth, right? So we need at least 500,000. We probably need more than that. And then on top of that, in the federal government, they need a ton too. So we just have this like stretch thin people. So the fact that vendors are giving us the ability to have people to train up people quickly and have them do the work for us, I think that's a really good place that we're going towards.
I attend cybersecurity conferences, and if I went to a conference tonight, I could probably get a rope and rope together 5 guys with big beards and baseball hats and bring them in a corner and go, hey, let's talk about this attribute stuff. And they say, oh, we knew all along there was a way to go, but we just couldn't. It was too expensive and too slow. So that's really what it was, is that they weren't taking stupid pills back then. The fact is they kind of knew it was the best practice, but there were limitations in just, so who's Christine? A half hour? No, we can't wait a half hour to find out who Christine is. We have to take and so what you're saying is that, well, John, the technology's finally caught up, and now we can go to the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very exciting. And I think COVID did that, right? I think COVID accelerated our technology. I mean, we can say that because look, we have very clear pictures on this call, right? So it's really great what has happened in the past couple of years.
When, no, I know you're not going to talk about challenges you've had. Let's say I go to another event and I get 50 CIOs from the federal government. I wrestle 10 in a corner. You probably get 10 different levels of knowledge of identity management and sophistication. And so if you can, because I know you've been in a lot of different areas. So what are the first steps for people maybe just getting into this? And what about the other end of the spectrum? People are really sophisticated. Are there different levels of approaches they should use, or maybe conferences they should attend or books they should read?
Yeah, so I think it depends on where you come from, right? So I came with a lawyer background, so I actually started in policy, and it made a lot of sense to me because policy is just basically rules of it's. I viewed FICAM policies as something similar to the rules of civil procedure. Here's how you must operate within the system, right? And then you have all the guidance on top of it. So then you can pretty quickly say, if this, that. You also have to memorize it. That's part of the problem. But once you have all that down, then that's really good. So that was my foundation. Then I moved on and I started working on research and development. And so that's where I learned how to do architecture and how different vendor products interacted with each other, because I knew in theory how it was supposed to work from policy. And then I realized that. And then the last step is that I then got to start working in the operations, which I find so much more fun than all the other stuff. And so in the operations, you get to actually build it and then watch it work or watch it fail and then fix it really quickly. So like that was my journey. I think it depends on where you're coming from. If you're coming from an engineering background, then starting to do operations and then slowly working your way backwards to learn policy is the other way to go. If you come from an audit background, then starting by doing audits on systems and learning the controls, and then learning more about policies, and then getting into the operations if you wanted to do that full stack and get to a point where you're an architect or actually hands-on on the vendor product. Those are the different ways to go. I think it really just depends on what your background currently is and what you want to learn, right? I don't want to learn how to do development. Like, I don't want to actually sit and develop things. So I don't have a coding experience. I am not allowed to get privileged access into the products that I help deploy. I have been told by some people that I am not trustworthy enough because they're afraid I'm going to break things. And that's okay, because I don't need to have that skill set. I understand how it all works, and I can speak decently intelligently with the engineers so I can understand what they're doing, and then I can ask them to do additional things.
It sounds like you're dancing with being called a policy wonk. I don't know if that's a good phrase or a bad phrase. Are you gonna walk away now if I use that phrase? But it sounds like you have all the building blocks for it.
Yeah, so I think you can, for example, NIST 863-4 is coming out soon. And that is, it's like, I feel very geeky because those are the things that I talk about with my friends in the community right now. Let's talk about how privacy is going to be instilled within the various levels, especially within the IAL level. How is that going to be able to be solved so that you don't have, privacy breaches when you're doing identity vetting, blah, blah, blah. So I definitely have those very geeked out policy discussion / arguments. I had one late into the night at RSA at a bar this last April, which was absolutely ridiculous, but it was fun.
Yeah. This topic comes up constantly. There's a Office of Management Budget, there's the executive, there's Ron Ross and his merry pranksters up there coming up with these things all the time. I've talked to Sean Fraser from Okta. Maybe you stumbled him at RSA.
I love Sean Fraser.
He's really bright.
Today.
That was, I think, episode 14. In fact, I grabbed him from the floor of the show and dragged him over and put a microphone in front of him. He's very shy and quiet, so somehow sometimes he managed to come up with a word or two. But everyone's getting bombarded with this. It's almost like people are saying, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. And, when you research this whole transition to zero trust identity management, there's a group called the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Council. That sounds pretty impressive. And in an article I read last night, they said that zero trust is at the risk management, at the risk of being an incomplete experience, And they said there's so much disjointed technical security that's going out there. It's kind of hard to apply what. I imagine in a commercial company, there may be 2 or 3 products trying to do the same thing, and no one really knows what they're doing. In the federal government, they getting bombarded by so many do this, do that, that they throw their hands up and say, stop the world, I want to get off. So you bring the voice of reason to this, or how can a typical garden variety agency get through all this?
Yeah, so I do think that they absolutely need someone who is an expert in all of those things. So when the EO came out last year, I went back and I read the Zero Trust NIST guidance.
207?
Yes, thank you. And so I read it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is everything we've been working towards. So I will say that identity management people, those are the people who read this and they totally get it. And it's because the whole thing is based on a foundation of ICAM. If you don't have that in place, you can't do the rest of the pieces, right? So that's number one. You need a strong foundational ICAM. So if you look at, for example, M2209, if you look at the requirements in M2209, the identity piece is pretty large, and it's very like regimented. And in fact, that's where they put a lot of the dates, is in the identity piece. And then after that, there's some other pieces. And if you go back down through, some of the other pillars kind of refer back up to identity. So I think that is a really good foundation. It's a must have, right? So how do you as an organization say, does this thing do zero trust or not? Because literally every product out there says we do zero trust. Right?
I know. You go to Google Trends and just I could probably go to the 7-Eleven and it'll be Slurpee, zero trust Slurpee. It would be, everyone does it. You get tires in your car at Costco. Hey, it's zero trust tires. It's just, they slap that label on there and it. Yeah.
And the reality is the majority of the products are ancillary. So they don't harm your zero trust architecture, but they don't actually advance your zero trust architecture. And you have to take one step back and you have to say, all right, what is it that I really want to accomplish with zero trust? And it's not like I want to accomplish this buzzword. It's I want to micro-segment my networks so that every user has to get re-authenticated before they get authorized to the next application. So I want to remove lateral movement within the system. So how do I do that? And the answer is, you need to get what I affectionately call it a zero trust broker. So it works with your network. It segments off your applications, and it also adds in. So you have to have an IDP, an identity provider. That IDP should have strong phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. So what does that mean? FIDO tokens, WebAuthn, or PKI. So a user comes in and then all this other information gets added to that user profile, right? So you've got, I know what my IP address is. Maybe I have a certificate on my GFE laptop. Maybe the tool is smart enough, it normally is, to know what my past user history is and what the behavior I usually have is. So if I'm entering at 3:00 in the morning, it's going to say, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. She's never awake this early. So it goes through and it decides, should I give this person access, right? So those are decided by the organization. What is your risk tolerance? If I want to get into an application that's really rich and like really good information, I can think of some that some of my clients have, right? I really want that information. They should be saying no, especially if I'm trying to get in at 3 a.m. And that's what zero trust is really created to do. So we've had all of these hacks lately, and it's almost Christmas, so we're going to get another one soon. Every Christmas we have a different security issue, and SolarWinds has shown the lateral movement is not something we can continue on with. And so that's like the number one thing to do. And how do we reduce lateral movement? We have to know who is on our network, what it is that they're trying to get to. And we have to say, well, you can't get to everything just because you got through the front gates. This isn't TSA. You can't just get in and go anywhere in the airport. Actually, you can't do that either, but in theory.
I was thinking about you in the bar at the RSA. I'll bet in another corner of the bar, they're having fistfights over authentication, authorization, and that's certainly we're not going to go down that rabbit hole here. However, a rabbit hole I think would be popular would be a phishing rabbit hole, maybe a phishing hole.
Yes.
And because this is really what the objective is to increase cybersecurity, and the big attack point is going to be phishing. I mean, that's pretty true. Yes. Every survey I've read talks about, hey, it's going to come after you with email. It's going to come after you with email. It's going to come after you with email. I'm sure there's people that hack systems out there. Good luck hacking the DoD. But I think it's going to be a phishing attack. And so the whole idea with this is to eliminate phishing and use that term phishing resistant, and use that WebAuth. And you said that very fast. WebAuth. Oh, wait a minute. That's web authentication. Oh, wait a minute. When my wife gets a coffee on the way to work at the Starbucks, that's WebAuth. It's not like it's 50,000 cryptographers talking about quantum encryption.
Actually, it is. You're absolutely right. When she goes to reload her Starbucks card on her phone,
WebAuth.
Web authentication. Right. That's absolutely true.
So don't get scared. Don't get intimidated by Christine. Oh, Christine, I'm scared of her. No, she's getting a coffee.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So a couple of things on phishing, because I think that there's more than just having phishing resistant, because a lot of people also just add MFA and they think we're good. All right, so let's back up. One is I would love to eliminate passwords. That, of course, all of us in identity management would love to eliminate passwords. It is not actually something that's feasible today. And there's so many reasons why, and I don't want to go into it, but that is not currently we can't do that, right? There's too many applications that use passwords on the back end. The passwords are still in the system. They're going to always be in the system. So that's number one. Number two is we have the ability to teach our users what a phishing attack looks like. And the way we do that is we send monthly phishing emails. Now, if you're like me and you have too many emails, you tend to end up you end up passing all of those emails because you don't get to them. But if you have a user who actually reads all of their emails and they get on a phishing email and they click the link, then they go to essentially training that says, hey, you just clicked a phishing email. Here's what would have happened if you had complied with what they asked you to do. And we want you to learn a little more about this and what you need to look for. And so I know some organizations do a really good job in their phishing campaigns, and they have gone from really high click rates with these campaigns to much lower. Now, here's the thing. You're always going to get a clicker. It's always going to happen. So you can't say, okay, well, I have this, I'm good. You're always going to get a clicker. So all the time, as a cybersecurity expert, all cybersecurity experts do is say, all right, well, it's always going to happen. So how do we reduce the risk that they end up getting in? Like, how do we layer security to make sure that people can't get in?
Yeah.
So then, because it's always going to happen, how do you fix that? Well, you have a phishing resistant MFA. So this is something that's required by the EO. It essentially is a phishing resistant MFA. And there are three types. One is in the federal government, it's a PIV card. In any other industry, it would be a PKI certificate. Yep. So it's PKI. By the way, everybody uses PKI all the time. They just don't know it. When you go to HTTPS on your web browser, there are PKI certificates talking to each other in the background. So the second one are two things that are based on FIDO standards. FIDO is Fast Identity Online, and they have created, they're creating really good standards for industry to use. So industry in this case for them includes Google. It includes Apple, it includes Amazon, Microsoft. So like all the heavy hitters in US industry are in this organization. And so they are like some of the smartest people I know. They get into a room. They do have fist fights, I'm sure. No, they don't. But it would be funny if they were having fist fights over standards. So they talk about things like how do we get more credentials more easily into the hands of consumers or the average person so that they can interact more safely with things online. But on top of that, how do we flip that and give that to our internal users so that we can protect our secret information within our systems? So what they've created from that, there's the same standards, but there's two different products that come from that essentially. One is called a FIDO token. So it is a hard token. You plug it into your USB port and you touch it. And so it says there is a live human next to this, and therefore you can trust that this is not getting RP'd into the computer and like it's a bad guy, right? And then the second one is called WebAuthn, where they tend to use your biometrics. So for me, it's fingerprint because of, the platform I use. Sometimes it can be your face. So it's some sort of biometric, and that biometric matches and it says, okay, this person is who they say they are. We can move them through. It is a wonderful way to strengthen your organization's credentials if you don't use PKI.
We should get a transcript of this because you have the big three. It's like 1, 2, 3. I mean, this is if someone's just confused and wants to, if a federal agency wants, how do I prevent phishing? Well, take Christine's 1, 2, 3. Maybe you should have a little business card made or something. Or these are the 3 ways to do it. It makes perfect sense. I mean, that is, and they got a lot of the tools sitting right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now the other thing that organizations do, and I understand why, and it's really helpful, is that they add multi-factor, and when they add multi-factor, they include push to your phone, right?
Yeah.
So that is how they do that second factor. Now, it is not phishing resistant. And there was a hack recently. Do you remember this hack?
Because I know it's the public phone system. I know.
Yeah, there's a hack recently where a bad actor was trying to get in, and they kept pushing the push notification to an administrator's phone, and the administrator did the right thing and kept denying it. But then, because hackers are getting really good, they called and they said, "I'm from your company, and I need you to push." And they did.
I know. It's public. Of all the things you think, it's the one moment you think you're safe, Christine, then the guy comes at you with a rifle or whatever. I don't know, a shovel.
Yeah.
When I do some research on this, I think the general accepted numbers for phishing is maybe 35% of people click on phishing attempts, and after education, it probably drops down to the single figures. And there are some very knowledgeable people that say, no matter what, you could have 5 PhDs, it's going to be 4%. Work in a garage changing tires is 4%. You Harvard PhD, 4%. Christine Owen, 4%. Maybe not you, but that seems to be what it is. And all we can do is it's like, if you have a seatbelt and airbags and you drive real carefully, generally speaking, you're going to avoid but trees can fall. I don't know. It can happen. And all we can do is just the reasonable things, huh?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'll be honest, in the phishing campaigns that some of the organizations I worked with, I actually got caught once on one of them, and I clicked. And the funny thing is, I was actually so upset because it basically said, and this is a true statement, it said, you almost hit your storage level for Microsoft. Did I believe that could be the case? Yes, because I get too much email.
Yeah.
And then I did the right thing, and I called the security officer, and I said, "Hey, I got this email. I think it's kind of odd, but it also could be true.
Yeah.
Is this the phishing campaign?" And he's so mean to me. He goes, "You might need to click." And I was like, now I know never to trust you. No, but the point is that, I was tired. I wasn't really looking at the email as well as I should have. I was going through email. This was at the time when I actually read all my emails. So I was going through the email really quickly, and boom, I got it. And anyone can have that off day. Anyone. And it's always, it's kind of interesting because sometimes those phishing emails come just right at the right moment where you're like, oh yeah, this is super important because I just had this conversation 3 hours ago. So I absolutely need to click on this link and get this done.
Yeah.
And then you get host, right? So yeah. I totally get it. And that's why it's always going to be, there is going to be a small percentage. Or you can just do what I do and not read emails. That
Well, this has been a fun conversation. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with friends. Call up Dr. Harry Greenspun and share it with him. Share it with everybody. Well, we're running out of time here, unfortunately, here. You've been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Christine Owen, Director at Guidehouse. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, John. It's been so much fun talking with you today.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.